This water bottle down here. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Housen. I'm alcoholic. And I have a sobriety date. It's the 23rd of February, 2014. Do have a home group. It is Carlisle New Beginnings group. Meets Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. for a 1-hour speaker discussion. There's a couple guys in there with big books, and they carry the message. And I'm just another dumb drunk, you know. It's kind of a quick story. I was, years ago, I was speaking at a meeting in Baltimore City called 40 West, and I was a little nervous because there were some giants there, at least in my mind. Keith Will, Tom Flynn, Chris Eby, amongst others, and I was a little nervous, but I put on my little shirt and tie, and I went out there, and somebody asked me before the meeting, he said, "Are you nervous?" This guy named Charlie. I said, "Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous." And he said, "Don't worry. Pretty soon you'll realize it's not about you, and then you won't be nervous anymore." And I thought, man, that son of a bitch. And I got a resentment, so I went home and I wrote an inventory on it, and I prayed for him. And about 2 weeks later, I came back to that group, and they said, "Oh, Charlie passed away." And I was like, "Oh my God, did God kill him?" And I was like, just so nervous about it. But like I shared, I do have a sponsor. He knows he's my sponsor. He's taken me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous as outlined in this beat up blue book here. I've had a spiritual awakening as the result of that action, and I try to pass that message along to others. So a little bit about my story, man. I mean, I'm a hopeless variety alcoholic. You know, from the time I was about 12 years old, I felt kind of like a insidious disconnect in my spirit. And the way that I describe it is like my skin didn't fit right, you know. I was comparing myself to you. I was comparing myself to others. And it's like I had this voice in my head that was just telling me, you're not enough. Like, you just need to try harder. Like, if you just were more like this guy, if you could talk to the girls like this gentleman, you'd be better off. And I wasn't raised that way. My father and mother never raised me with a strict discipline like that. They never told me I wasn't enough. I just sort of had this voice telling me that all my life. And I just, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I learned that is a spiritual malady, right? A disconnect deep within my soul. And, by the time I was 12, I really could use a drink. And we proceeded to find some. Being young, it was harder to find alcohol than it was easier to find other substances. And I definitely did a lot of those too. But we finally did get a hold of some alcohol, and I found relief from that voice, from that disconnect. The story goes, we stole a bunch of liquor, mixed it together in a big maple syrup jug that we cut the top off of, put some tin foil over it, stashed it under the bed, told my parents we'll be over here, told their parents we'll be over here, and we met at the schoolyard across the street, popped the lid off that alcohol, and just started downing it, and by the time that stuff went down my throat, it burned, it tasted nasty. It was like gin, brandy, rum, vodka, whiskey, all mixed together. And man, my buck teeth went right back in, my cowlick, my weird hair straightened right out, Oh man, my shoulders went back and I could breathe for the first time in my life. Closest thing to a spiritual experience I had up to that point that wasn't actually a spiritual experience. But I'll tell you, I found some ease and comfort. But because of this allergy that I have, I drank well past the point that I should have, blacked out, and came to the next morning with very little memory of what had happened the night before, covered in vomit and deathly sick. And I didn't think 1 second about how I was sick. I thought, I found the answer, and I found the elixir. Dr. Bob calls it the panacea of all ills, Alcohol, solved my problem. And over the years, I progressed really rapidly in alcoholism, and, I have some consequences. I'll tell you a couple quick stories, just to kind of highlight the allergy in me. We had gone to the Warped Tour in 2002 when it was actually good. I was fancying myself a little punk rock kid. Really, I was whoever you wanted me to be. But, I kind of identified as that, at least in high school. And, I was out of high school at this point, but we went to the Warped Tour, and afterwards we came back, and there were some punk rock kids get together in the basement, and they passed along a handle of Vladdy, Any Vladdy drinkers in here? No, yeah, okay. All right, this handle came around to me. I took a nip off the bottle, and next thing you know, it's coming back to me. It's coming back. And I go into a blackout, and I wake up in the backyard, sprawled out with the hose, from the backyard, puking and washing myself with the hose. Well, I laid there for about 20 minutes, and then the next thing I know, I felt somebody sit down on my lap, and it was this chick from the party, and she just reached down and grabbed me by the throat and gave me this big tongue kiss. And I was like, wow, man, like this is magic, like I've arrived, until about 15 seconds later, the sliding glass door came to the left, and a 6'2", 250-pound dude who looked very upset came out and proceeded to chase me down the street and get me in a chokehold, to which I gave him a black eye and he gave me a black eye. And now, if alcohol was still doing that magic, you'd have a different speaker. That was nothing. That was just a regular night for a guy like me. Another story, I remember this time I'm getting some consequences as a result of my drinking and my actions, and my parents are trying to, manage the situation, right? So they thought maybe their parenting had caused my alcoholism, so they wanted to kind of rally around and get the family together at the table for dinner, where we could talk about our day, and they could at least keep eyes on me, for when I'm after school and all that. So what ends up happening is, what happens to most of us. I leave school at noon, and I had every intention of being at dinner, right? But we get down to the place, and my buddy says the wrong question. He says, "Do you want a drink?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll have one." So he hands me a glass of Wild Turkey, and you know the rest of the story, right? After that Wild Turkey goes down, I'm like, "Let's get some 40s," and then some dude shows up with a blunt with angel dust, and, I'm off to the races, and I go into a blackout PCP. That's what we call some wet, yeah. So Love Boat is what we called it. Love Boat, right? So I'm off in a blackout. I come to midnight trying to scrape things together, like, had a little stash of mouthwash, right? You try to treat your alcohol breath with more alcohol, like that makes sense, and I'm showing up and they're turning the lights on and they're sitting they're crying, This is what their son is doing to their lives. And it just goes on and on like that, and I had 3 underage drinkings, I got arrested with marijuana. I was possession charge. All by the time I was 20 years old. And I'll back up a little bit. After I was 18, the last day of school, we all congregated on the front skip trail is what we called it. It was like a little trail that went in between the houses across the street from the school. And all the hoodlums would gather there, and I got 5 on it, I got 5 on it, I got 5 on it. We'd pool our money together and go get our cases of beer and our weed and whatever we needed, and, to do our thing on the weekend. Well, this was the last day of school, and my buddy has his Suburban out with the big speakers playing "School's Out Forever." We're cracking beers, smoking blunts. The whole summer is a blur. I have very little memory of that summer. But I can remember coming to out of some kind of haze, and I was in a psych ward, through a series of events that I won't spare you the details of. And it was my first placement. And my mother had put me in that place against my will, which is called a 302. I'm sure you're familiar. And I'm sitting in that place in the paper gown with the grippy socks, smoking cigarettes in the ventilator room, and experiencing what I would later come to realize was detox, but I thought was a panic attack, So I'm like, give me the meds. I got the panic disorder. I need the meds, right? Which they did not give me those. And I shook it out. And I'm on the payphone. This is the level of selfishness I bring to the table, right? I'm on the little, phone that's attached to the wall or whatever at this point. And I'm calling my mother. And I'm saying, why in the heck would you put me in here? What is wrong with you? P.S., can you send money for cigarettes, That's the level of selfishness that I bring to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I got a quick question for you. Do you think that selfishness gets better because I stopped drinking? No, it gets worse, So at this point in my life, I had a first step experience, you know. I had seen the hopelessness of alcohol, that when I took a drink, you know, I couldn't stop. I went off to the races, you know. And so I gathered my forces in that place for the few days that I was there and decided, like, I'm done. You know, I'm gonna grow up, I'm gonna man up, I'm gonna get a job, I'm gonna get a car, I'm gonna get a girlfriend, hopefully, and an apartment, and then, like, just separate from this old lifestyle. And I meant it. I really meant it. I get out of this place, and you know the story. It lasts for about 2 weeks, you know, which is a very good accomplishment for an alcoholic of my type. And somebody asked me the wrong question, and I had a thought like, yeah, I might as well just have one. And I'm off to the races again. And this begins the years of stopping and starting and stopping and starting and going into treatment, going into detox, going into the psych ward, which I became well acquainted with, powerlessness in that time. So I want to kind of talk about, you know, what makes me alcoholic, you know? You know, it's definitely, when I first came in, I heard all the horror stories. I heard, you know, I drank away my relationship, you know, my marriage, my 20-year marriage. I lost a house, I lost a car, I have 5 DUIs, you know, I heard all that stuff. And I really equated that at the time with what made me alcoholic. And so it was really easy for me to say, yeah, you know, I never had the house, I never had the relationship, I never had the job. Like, I'm not like you people, which is the first defense that I had against a spiritual approach in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I ain't alcoholic. I might be an addict. I'm definitely an addict, but I'm definitely not alcoholic. So what makes me alcoholic? You know, I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. You know, when I take one drink of alcohol, it sets up a phenomenon of craving. The first demands the second, demands the third, demands the fourth. And for me, I have no power over that. I cannot stop once I start. So what happens for a guy like me to get here is I get stopped. And usually that comes in the form of handcuffs or blacking out or running out or passing out, you know. And that's how I live my life, you know, and that's the allergy. But if the allergy was the only problem that we had to face here, detoxes would be kicking out winners, right? If you have a strawberry allergy and you eat strawberries and you break out in hives, your throat closes up, you start sweating, you know, maybe get this AA dry mouth, you know, and end up in the hospital. Like, the answer to that is don't eat strawberries, you know. But if you came back to my house 2 weeks later after being in the hospital and found a whole bunch of empty cartons of strawberries with me with like red juice all over my mouth, you wouldn't think my problem was strawberries, would you? You'd think this guy's crazy. And that's the other side of it that I didn't understand, right? Is that why can't I manage the decision to stay stopped over the period of time? Over any considerable period of time, my problem gets worse, never better, you know? And it's like somebody installs a spring in my gut, like Clancy used to say, and it just gets tighter and tighter every day, you know? And all of a sudden, I'm really concerned about how you are living your life, and it is not in accordance with my will, you know? And, you know, I could be, when I'm drinking, I don't care. You know, I could be losing the job, losing the car, losing the girlfriend, giving all that stuff away. But the second I get sober, now I'm really concerned, you know, and I have to make sure everything's lined up. So one thing I don't understand when I get here is that I have a mind that's going to bring me back to the first drink. You know, it's going to move me towards a drink. And I'm defenseless against that. I'm defenseless. You know, an example, I'm getting out of that psych ward. You know, I resolve that I'm going to do better. I get a little dishwashing job, you know. I'm washing dishes in a fancy 10-top restaurant, 10-top bar right at the front, open kitchen. Everybody's in their whites, you know. It's real high pressure, high, you know, expectations. And, you know, she's just on my case. The chef's on my case 24/7. Come on, faster, 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 faster. You know, we got to get this food out for these customers, you know, these guests. And I'm getting a resentment, you know. It's building up inside of me. That spring's getting tighter and tighter. And I don't know what to do with that stuff, you know. It's building up, and I'm having these 3 a.m. conversations, you know. I don't know if you've had any 3 a.m. conversations, but I have. You know, I'm in the bed, thinking about, man, this job, I don't think I can do this very much longer. You know what'll fix that? And then I have the voice that goes, no, you know what? You promised you weren't going to do that, right? You're a man of integrity and honor today. You're a man of decency. You don't act like that anymore. Nah, but we can manage it this time. This time, have you ever just tried smoking weed, Do the Rastafarian religion. They're talking about spirituality. Let's do the Rasta, Yes, Yah, And that makes sense to a guy like me, and then I'm off 2 days later, the same thought occurs. And this time I have no defense, and I'm buying a bag, and then somebody hands me a beer, and I might as well, and then I'm off to the races doing other drugs. And my mom kicks me out of the house. She had wised up and went to one of those Al-Anon meetings, and she very quickly saw that my selfishness was a manipulation. We were talking about that in the car on the way here, I'll look real pitiful coming back from a run. I got one shoe is off, lost, and, my shirt's all dirty and torn, and I'm coming back. Can I please have a bowl of cereal, She's like, I'll push you a bowl of cereal across the stoop, but you got to go to treatment. Damn it. All right, I'll go. If you let me back in the house, give me $60. So this is the way I used, I'm a manipulator. And, I did go off to treatment that time. And, again, the cycle starts. At a certain time, I can't differentiate the true from the false. My alcoholic life is the only normal one. Talks about that a couple times in the book. It says, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed, right? And what happens to a guy like me is the recuperative power of the ego, right? The human ego, right? I get in the treatment. I figure out the lingo. I get some meals under my belt. I start to get a little sense of ease and comfort coming back, and then this is building, it's building in the background, you see? It's like, all right, I'm going to get it this time. This is going to be the time. This time I'm going to show my parents what I'm made of. This time I'm not going to go around old friends. I'm going to do my 90 and 90. I'm going to get that sponsor that they promised me would help me. And I discharge out of that place fully disconnected from the fact that I'm alcoholic. And by 90 days in there, I'm resentful at all the AA people, and I'm off again, running. So I finally sober up. Let's get sobered up now. So the events that happened to get me into Alcoholics Anonymous was that I went on another run. It wasn't a bad run. It wasn't the worst run I went on. Things had gotten progressively worse. I was kicked out of the house living in my car. I was ripping and robbing, running the streets. And coincidentally, my mother and father had got on the phone and called all the different places I was, doing drugs and drinking, and told them not to let me in there. So they kicked me out of those places too. And I was just a lone wolf, So I finally manipulated. And how you have to do this for anybody who's not done is you have to find people that are younger than you, that are a little bit more gullible. And you have what they want, which is that you're over 21. And they have what you want, which is money and a place to live, right? So I manipulated a situation like that and was just drinking around the clock, And somehow, when I detoxed off all those hard drugs, that was the end of that. But my drinking went from, sporadic to daily. And this time, I can't stop going to the liquor store and the distributor. We talked about this in the car the other day, on the way up here. I'm just, every day, today's the day. This is the day I'm going to do it. I'm going to show them this is the day. About 10 o'clock, I get a little sandwich down, drink my little tea cooler gallon, at work or whatever. Start getting that, feeling a little better. And I revisit that decision I made, forever, for good and all. I mean, that's a little bit much, Maybe I'll just go to the liquor store tonight and start that tomorrow, right? And I'm off again. And those were the years of quitting for me. I did it every day. Did you ever come to in the bathroom or whatever, puking in the toilet, saying I'll never do it again? Yeah, any hands? Yeah. did you do it again? You know? And I can't stop once I start. So I sober up. Eventually I run out, and I have an obsession of the mind to kill all obsessions. And something broke inside of me, internally, I was done. And I knew about AA. You know, I had been exposed to it in treatment. I'd gone to a few meetings, but I was pretty sure I didn't want what you had. Whatever that was, you know, that was not for me. I saw the God business and all the different steps that the word God is, you know, right over here, right? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I know what you meant. I know you meant God, you know, but you used clever wording and stuff. And I was just convinced, you know, that was not for me. You know, I didn't want to be, I would sit in the back of the room. No offense to my back row guys, you know, I mean, much love to you. I'm back there with you, you know, but I would put on my headphones and put my head down, and I would just count how many times the speaker said, and like count the ceiling tiles. And I wasn't picking up what you were putting down. But hopeless and having a true first step experience, I know when it was just me and the bottle and nothing else but sheer desperation, I broke inside and I really committed my life. Like I decided I was going to just drink until I died. You know, I turned my will and life over to the care of alcohol and its cousins, and that was going to be it. You know, I was just going to drink. I was going to leave in Las Vegas style, you know, I'm just go out with a blaze, you know. And that didn't happen because sometime in that process, you know, my father had confronted me and suggested it might be wise for me to go back to treatment. And it was a relief, man. It was like a weight off my shoulders, you know. Do you ever get arrested and put in the back of a cop car and you're like, thank God, like thanking the officer, thank you, officer, because you can stop now, you know. Like that's what it felt like. A weight came off my shoulders, and I went into treatment. And 46 days later, in a 28-day program, I was released to the wild, you know, back into society, into a halfway house. And a couple of men took me under their wing, and they introduced me to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love the fellowship. I love the meetings. I love the picnics. I love that stuff. I love the connection that you get when one drunk shares in the language of the heart. You know, people were talking about bearing their soul to each other. You know, talking about laughing about things that I would have took to the grave. Talking about it openly in the room, you know. And something about that really started to work on me, and I started to be attracted to what you had. I was happier than I had ever been in my first year in Alcoholics Anonymous. My life was a mess, but I was happy, you know. And I ran around the fellowship. I picked up coffee, you know, commitments. I cleaned ashtrays. This was the early 2000s. Some meetings you could still smoke. And so, of course, that's going to be my home group. And, you know, I'm going to the diner, you know, smoking half a pack of cigarettes, drinking a pot of coffee, and wondering why I can't sleep at night, you know. But I was sober, man, and I was serious about it, man. I was really serious. They put a big book in front of me, and I opened it up, and I started reading it, and I got through one paragraph realizing I didn't understand a single word that was said, and I shut it, and I put it off to the side, you know, because I didn't understand that language. And nobody was, I don't want to say nobody was carrying a message, but the sponsor that I had was like, you need to not drink for like a year before you take a look at that, you know? And that's just where it was, you know, in the early 2000s. But I can tell you that what did happen to me is I got sicker and sicker and sicker in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I was sick of you, I was sick of me, and I just couldn't stop thinking. Every time, I ran into one of the old-timers that used to sponsor me back in the day a couple of months ago, and he was like, Andy, you were on one manic episode after the next, you know? You had so many ideas of how you thought it should be that we couldn't present you anything, you know? And I have to make amends to that, you know, for the fact that I slammed these guys for not putting the steps in front of me. The whole time they were trying to get me to look at this stuff. And I was just, I had so many other ideas that I just wasn't done And so I eventually, I didn't drink somehow, but I went to the psych ward, and I went to York Hospital. And I had quite an experience in there where two men visited me that were trying to 12-step me in the first year of my recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they basically informed me that, the reason why I was in there is because I was not working the suggested program of recovery outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and that I had untreated alcoholism, and that I better find a power greater than myself, or else I was going to have this be my current experience for the rest of my life, however long or short that might be. I wasn't sure. And I was defeated, man. It wasn't a good message. They pissed me off. They really did. And when I got out of there, I was so desperate and shattered that a man swooped me up by the name of Mike Z, who we both know so well, me and Zach, yeah, Mike Z. Mike Z took me to a group called Middle Street Group in Hanover, Pennsylvania. And it was a big book study. And there was a beginner's meeting before the big book study. And they all went around the room and they shared their experience working and living the 12 steps and what had happened in their lives as a result. They talked about getting their health back. They talked about their families being reestablished. They talked about things that gave me chills. Man, I'm getting chills just talking about it now. They made AA look attractive, They did AA in their homes. They invited people that were detoxing to stay on their couch and take them through the 12 steps. They would kneel and pray in the upper room, And I don't know what about it, whether it be the combination of me being ready and willing, or whether it be the attraction that the members of, disclosing their history and really what it looks like in the chapter working with others, they made it come alive. They demonstrated it. And so I started to be really attracted to that, and I asked a man to be my sponsor and went through the 12 steps. And we did it at a really quick clip. And I don't knock that because it worked really well for a while until it didn't. So I had my first experience with a spiritual awakening, right? I can tell you that going through that process in the book, I became on fire for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was running down every newcomer in every meeting, shaking their hand, right? Like the guy that said to you, like, hey, you want my number? And I'm like, just terrorizing people in my local area. But a number of them said yes, and I started working the steps with people. And what happened was my life got better. I don't know how else to describe it. That disconnect that I said, I had an answer to it. I could kneel and pray and talk to my higher power and find ease and comfort in those steps, in that spiritual awakening. And I really rock and rolled with that for a long time, for about 3-4 years. And what happened was I met her, and she was going to be the answer. Now that I had finally figured out the answer to alcoholism, which is these 12 steps, now it's time to settle down and manage my life, and get the things that I want, right? Get the girl, get the car, get the job. And I got all that. And I'll tell you what, everything was good for about 6 months. And then the baggage came out on both of our sides. I have there's an old defect of character that I have, and I just discovered this in inventory. I'm a nice, upstanding guy, right? And I will use that to get what I want. And then the baggage comes out. Then you start acting the way I don't want you to, And then I'm nasty, mean, egotistical, and arrogant. And that causes a lot of trouble in a relationship, And I'm not happy to tell you this story, but she ended up relapsing, and I'm chasing her around the rooms of AA, trying to get her sober again. And one night, the tension had mounted, and I'm sitting on my bed, and she had relapsed with one of my sponsees, and they were running around doing drugs and stuff, and I was so angry. I've never been angry as that in my life, and I haven't to this day been that angry since that day. And I'm telling you, I'm saying the serenity prayer till I'm blue in the face. And it's just, it's up to here. And I kick the door down in her apartment and shake her up. And she calls the cops and I go to jail. And years later, I sat across the table. Well, we didn't sit across the table. We took a hike. And I made amends to that woman. And she told me that she was so terrified of me in my anger. And it's, I needed to hear that. And I sat across the table and I made it right with her. And I was working with a guy at the time who happened to be a mechanic. I didn't know that then. But as I was leaving that amend, my car broke down on the side of the road. So I started calling my guys, because I didn't have AAA. And one of my guys was like, I'll be there in 40 minutes. I'm a mechanic and I got the tool for you, diagnostic tool. So he shows up and fixes my car, right? Like we carry each other through this, at sometimes. So anyway, long story short, I had made amends to her, but I had gone to jail that night and I got bailed out for $60. And it was a long time ago, which I promptly paid my sponsor back. Okay? Believe me, I did. And, the best thing that seemed at the time was to move to Baltimore. And so I packed up all my stuff, not knowing about Baltimore, and moved down there. And I had heard of some guys named Steve and Tom who were running around wearing suits and ties and doing AA. And I don't know. For whatever reason, I just thought maybe that'd be the answer for me. So I sought them out, and I found these guys at Harbor City Speaker Group. And I started to follow them around and do what they did. Then come the years of the spiritual malady. They started sharing with me their experience. But they didn't just share it like talk, they demonstrated it. And, and I wanted to just be up on the podium and be in the center of attention, not seeing that ego was starting to reestablish itself in me. And I began to make little decisions based on self, which placed me in a position to be hurt. Because look, what I got, it's like it feeds on me. It's like a parasite. It gets in my thinking, gets in my gut, and it just chews on me daily. And so I think, I need to seek a human power to solve that. It may not be a drink, but it may be like sex or something, or food, or definitely food, you can tell, But I start sexual relationships with women, and I'm not proud of it, in the rooms Alcoholics Anonymous, not based on any kind of principle. And I'm just running through, like it's a drug. And a guy like me, I don't stay sober doing that. I don't stay sober living like that. There's a line in the book that says, if our conduct continues and we are not sorry, we are quite sure to drink. And that's something that was a theory for me at the time. But now it's a fact of my experience. So I moved back up to Pennsylvania, and sometime around February 20th, I had some kind of problem, which I will not disclose because it's pretty humiliating. I've shared it a couple times, maybe some of you know it. But I basically had a lot of pain, and I went to the clinic, and they gave me an Oxycontin. And I was just shattered at the time because I was in a lot of pain. I had a physical ailment. Well, that set off the allergy. And then I found myself a few days later in a position where I was without defense against the first drink. And I didn't have the faith to pull on. Because what happened was I started to back down off the steps. Life was, believe it or not, at that time, prior to that drink, life was good. And what I have is this illness that will tell me I don't have an illness, They'll tell me everything's good. I feel good, so I must be doing good. And I don't need to go to that meeting. I don't need to go to that detox commitment tonight. I'll need to pick up this new guy. He's not really willing anyway. He hasn't done his 4-step like I asked him to. Maybe I'm being a little aggressive with the guys that I sponsor. Maybe I just need to relax a little bit and let them come to me. And that makes sense. And I even went and shared it with other AA members and my sponsor. And they were like, yeah, you are kind of crazy about this whole thing. Maybe relax and try to get a life, too. Have a life, too. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, and I'm not blaming it on them because this thing centers in the mind, right? And it comes from me and my decisions. Got me drunk. So I sober up February 23rd, 2014. And I've never looked back since. I was in a psych ward because that's really where I needed to be. And they detoxed me, and I I found the closest guy with a beat up big book like this, and I just got under his wing, man. And I said, I'll do whatever it takes. There was no wondering if I'm alcoholic. There was no, messing around with new girls. There was no period where I was in a recovery house still trying to test the waters. I was convinced. Like I had the flames of hell licking my ass in the door. And I was going to do whatever it took, And I did, and I got honest about my condition. And I admitted that I'm backed into a corner, into a trap that I can't spring. I'm without defense against the first drink, and I needed a power greater than myself to do the job for me, because clearly the way Andy had been running life hadn't been working. Clearly the path that Andy chose to take of self-knowledge, being the answer, got me another white chip, Andy trying to run the show gets me full of fear, not able to make a living, depressed, restless, irritable, and discontent. That's me on my own power. So I better find a power by which I can live, and it has to be a power greater than myself. But where and how do I find this power? And that's exactly what this book is about. AA is a book. It's a book. And in the book is contained a way of life. I can sit in the rooms of AA and get sicker. It's not until I actually crack the book with the sponsor and start doing what it says that I recover. And for me, recovery and sobriety are not mutually exclusive. I think I'm saying that right. But I have to have a recovery program if I want to stay sober. It's not like I come in and get the sobriety first and then worry about the recovery later. I have to recover from this hopeless condition of mind, body, and spirit. And I was asked a couple of questions. One of the questions that I was asked is, does my experience abundantly confirm powerlessness? Do I believe it to be true to my innermost self? Yes, 100%. Am I convinced at a certain time I'll have no effective mental defense against the first drink, no matter how long I've been sober? Yes, I'd seen that happen in my own life, in my own experience. Do I understand I'm beyond human aid? That was a hard one to understand. But like a perfect love, a perfect job, a perfect arrangement is not going to stop me from picking up a drink. Because I've been happy and sober in a recovery house sponsoring guys penniless. And I've been miserable with all the stuff. It's the disease, it's an inside job. And I take me everywhere I go. Do I understand I'm beyond human aid? And still today, the most powerful desire to stop drinking will not be enough to stay stopped. This isn't, they say the only requirement is a desire for membership is a desire to stay sober or to stop. But a desire to stop it says very clearly in this book, a powerful desire to stop is never enough. How many times have I tried to stop with my will and made it like 3 hours, before I'm knocking down the door of the bar again, or, closing the bar, or running off to the dope man's house, getting the fix, whatever I need. I need a power beyond myself. But I have to look within. And the problem that I face with that is that I'm blocked from accessing that power greater than myself. What am I blocked by? The book says manifestations of self. Fear, resentment, and sex are the common manifestations of self. Harms in sex relations. Fear and resentment, That stuff blocks me off from the sunlight of the spirit. So getting down to causes and conditions is important for a guy like me. I have to take a look at, where my pride has been inflated, right? Where these situations have harmed my self-esteem, And then on the other side of that, I have to look at, all right, well, where was I at fault? Where was I afraid? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I dishonest? And where was I selfish? And I didn't think I was selfish, until my sponsor said, most alcoholics are extreme examples of self-will run riot, though they usually don't think so. I was like, damn, well, what do you mean by selfish? Because I thought that meant, we were talking about this in the car, I thought that meant arrogant and conceited. Really, it just means I'm all I think about. My life, my problems, my woes, getting things the way I want them, arranging life in a way that'll suit me. If I can just get it right, this time it's going to be different. I have to stop living on that basis. So how do I do that? I got to quit playing God. I got to quit playing. My friend Ron from Doylestown will say, hey, quit playing. Quit playing. Quit playing God, you know? And I just have to keep it simple like that, you know? I got to quit playing God. I'm not in charge. I'm not running the show. I don't have the best ideas for AA. That was a hard one for me because I thought I had the best ideas for AA. You ever be in a group conscience with a guy like that, right? Have to write a lot of inventory on it. That's me, you know? So thankfully, there's a way. There's a way up and a way out. And to turn my will and life over to the care and protection of God as I understand him, I knelt and said that third step prayer and I wrote inventory. I got down to causes and conditions. I admitted the flaws in my makeup, which had been accumulated by my effort to run my life on self-will, you know? And it was freeing. I got free from that. Going into 6 and 7, it's really a lifelong practice, you know? It starts with an hour with my higher power, you know, just being God, and a list of evidence of where I have been at fault in my life. You know, I never drank behind, how do I want to say this? I never drank behind an asset, you know? When I was doing well, anyway. So I take a look at these defects of character in 6 and 7, and I realize that these are the things that are blocking me from God. And I need God's aid to get rid of them, you know? So I bring them up to him, you know? I don't work on them, you know? Working on them is practicing them. I have to give them over to my Creator. And I knelt and said the 7-step prayer. Now, I had some old ideas and stuff which I brought into Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to share a couple of them with you because they're kind of funny. Maybe you'll think it's funny, maybe you won't. But I'll tell you, at the time, it didn't seem funny. I want to be seen as a man, but behave as a child. Here's one. Rules don't apply to me if I pay. If I have an apartment that I pay for, I can do what I want with it. No. I can do what I want with women and get away with it. Freedom and happiness comes from my ranking in society, right? If I help you and you don't do as I say, I get upset. Respect and love should be given to me without any thought or effort. Others need to earn my respect. I should be given it. I don't have to pay for my mistakes. You know, these are some of the things that came out of my inventory. And that's current. That's current stuff, right? I'm currently in step 9, living in 10, 11, and 12. The sponsorship lineage I have, we continue to go through the steps. And I'm not making a case for if you go through the steps once and live in 10, 11, and 12, rock on. You know, for me, I want a new experience. I want to come to this thing fresh. I have current experience with it, you know? And that's cool with me. And so I go into this 9-step process and I made some cool amends. And as a result, I have my family in my life today, my mother and father. I get to show up and be a son. I've got to travel, you know, sometimes on AA commitments, sometimes just for vacation. You know, I got to go to Mexico. I got to go to Ireland, England, Italy, and I didn't drink. I didn't even think about drinking. And it was a blast, you know. I've got to put myself through school, you know. I've paid back 95% of that $30,000 loan. That's crazy because I don't make a lot of money. I really don't, you know. Sometimes I hemorrhage money. But through making financial restitution to my family and to people I harmed and stole from, you know, your credit gets better, you know, when you start cleaning up the wreckage. So today, my life, I live in 10, 11, and 12, you know. And what that looks like for me is that I have to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When it crops up, I ask God at once to remove it. I make a discussion with my sponsor or another person. I make amends if need be, and then I turn my thoughts resolutely to someone I can help. It works, it really does, you know. Some of the places meditation practice has taken me. I mean, remember one time, I'll end with this story. I'm walking down the street, and I was living in Baltimore at the time, and I was trying to figure it out. I don't know how else to describe it, you know, like things were just not as I would have them, you know. And I'm like figuring it out. I'm doing the AA math. Like if I can just get this piece over here and this chest piece over here, it'll be just how I want it. And I'm like, damn, I realized my predicament. God help me. And I turn and I look to my right and it says, Meditation Center. right? Meditation center. So I walk in, guy says, "Oh, take your shoes off." Took my shoes off. He's like, "Come get some tea." Had a cup of tea. He said, "Come sit in the room with us." And I sat, they put on incense, and they hit this big singing bowl. Boom! You know what I mean? And like I sat with that stuff. I sat with it. And what happened was, as I get out of self, I don't know, the scales fall from my eyes. I don't know how else to describe it. I wanted, in short order, when I got here, to have the answer to the spiritual malady just given to me right away on a silver platter. And I did get that. But I have to kind of work at it a little bit, Like, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. I want to feel good now. But AA says, you do this action first, then you get the result. And as a result of that, I have a good life, a decent life. I'm a man of honor and integrity. And I just didn't have the power to apply those principles in my life. I've been shown them all my life. I had. I think what we do here is just to, I don't know. It's kind of like what everyone else is doing in the world, I just want to get a little peace in my life, have a job where I can go and be useful, maybe a family, maybe a friends, and just share time and be free and experience like the gifts of life, the beauty of living, and I mean, I have this alcoholic mind, and this book describes how exactly to do that from the perspective of a sick alcoholic like me. So thank you for my life, and thank you for this commitment.